Okay, so you're finally out of the boring old Photoshop 101. Thank God, right? No more talking about what do these tools mean, what do I do with these layers. You're actually going to get to put these practices into use with painting. And so before we talk about actually painting faces, I just want to go over some of the basic ideas of what it means to paint a face by talking about basic forms. And so here we have a good old cube. You may be wondering, why am I introducing you to a cube? Well, a cube is great for simplifying three things that are essential to sculpting a face. A cube will demonstrate that a form has a light side, a kind of base regular color, and then it has a shadow side. And so suppose in this situation, the light is coming from this way. And that is why this side of the cube is lit up lighter than this side, right? Even we know it when we see a light is cast on an apple, there's a shadow on the opposite end. And so we have to treat a face sort of like a basic form. A human face is actually relatively similar to, say, a sphere. So a sphere, we have our light right here. We have our base color, and we have the shadow side, right? And so to be able to do this means that you will be able to create a face, as a face typically looks like an egg. And an egg is, if you ask me, looks pretty similar to a sphere, right? And so how do you paint a sphere? Well, let's get started together. Let me just erase this and we'll try it again. All right, let's choose a base color. I just dropped that down using my hard brush, 100% hardness, right? That's your base color. Now we're gonna establish the light and the shadow side. So I'm gonna move this down a little bit because I'm feeling a little bit ticked off that it's not in the center. There we go. I'm gonna lock the layer, and now we're gonna add a light source. So we're gonna make our brush as big as possible so it transitions very nicely through the colors. So I'm gonna start shrinking my brush by pressing the brush size. And as we get closer and closer to the top, we're gonna keep shrinking our brush size until it basically reaches a point where it's like super bright, right? We're gonna add back some of that roundness, just a little bit, so you can just see that this rounds out, right? And if this sphere were like, say, a really reflective kind of shiny material, then you might see like a super strong highlight, kind of like that, right? But in this case, I'm not looking for that. I'm just gonna give it just a tiny bit, but not too much. So we have our highlight. Now, after that, we have to give the sphere a shadow, obviously, right? So to do that, we're gonna choose a darker color. Again, huge brush, huge. To sculpt that bottom side, we're gonna start shrinking our brush, shrinking our brush, shrinking our brush, shrink, 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 until you basically get to the darkness that your original color was. Correct? Now, this typically would be enough if you're just drawing a sphere in the vacuum, right? There's no light is not bouncing around, not doing anything. Perfect. But since we live in the real world, light will bounce all around and interact with everything it touches until it runs out of energy. So that means we're gonna get ourselves a bounce light right in the shadow. So because light is gonna be bouncing off the floor, off the ceiling, right? So we're gonna take a slightly lighter color and just give ourselves just a slight bounce light. Not underneath here though, because this is where the sphere is sitting on the floor, and that means there's basically the floor is a shadow and it's only bouncing back shadow, so there's no light, correct? And there you go. You have a regular sphere. And to sell the realism that the sphere is sitting on the floor, we're going to give ourselves a good old shadow. And as it gets closer to that sphere, it's going to be darker, right? And since the light seems to be like this, we gotta push that shadow just a little bit to the left. And there you got a good old sphere. And once you're able to do something like this real quick, that means you're able to move on and actually paint a face. Because when you're thinking about a face, let me merge these two together. A face is pretty similar in concept. You're gonna create an egg shape. Let's do a dark color so you can see. Do an egg shape. Do an egg shape. There we go. There we go. Just fix up this egg shape so it looks like an egg, or kind of like an upside down egg. And the face is going to have similar ideas. So if we have top-down lighting, that face is going to receive some shadow underneath here. And then we're going to have highlight on top of here. Right? And then all the different features of the face is where we get those interesting shadows, and then that's where it starts getting complicated. And so let me show you an example of a standard face. Let's see if I can find one. Here we go. This is just a screenshot of a standard model face that I took from Portrait Studio. It's really great for creating generic scenarios that you can then apply to your own art. And so as you can see here, the egg shape, and once again, this section here is darker than this section here, right? So we're seeing the highlight right over here. And then we're seeing those core shadows coming down here. And then everything else is just nuanced variations of those ideas, right? Like this is the base color, but since the eye socket recesses inwards, that's why we get ourselves a little bit of shadow here. The nose sticks out, so we're gonna get a shadow here. And since it sticks out, we're gonna catch some of that light from top down. And that's why this part is lit up. This part catches some of that light from top, and so on, right? And so let me just teach you how to draw a face before we move on to how to paint a face. Because drawing is such an important foundation for you to understand how a face is structured and how the proportions are met, that if you're not able to measure correctly, when you go to paint, you're just going to end up confusing yourself and getting really lost in everything. And so let me show you the proportions of a face. And so if you notice here, the distance between the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and all that, we're going to cut this up by drawing some center lines. When you think of a face, we're going to think of it in symmetry. And typically faces are close to symmetrical, but not quite, because we're human. Humans aren't perfect. Even celebrities aren't perfect, right? And so straight down the middle, you're going to see that the eyes sit about 5 eyes sizes apart. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a good way to measure distance when you're considering this is that the size of one eye is going to be able to sit in between the 2 eyes. And so, see right there, sitting quite close to them, right? And if you look at it from the side, it's about half an eye. Half an eye. And at first you may feel like you have to measure these distance, which is fine. But as you do it more and more, you're going to start building up that muscle intuition, and your eyes are going to be trained to realize, okay, maybe this isn't quite there. Is this right? Is this measurement about right? And then you will no longer have to actually consciously think about these symmetry. So I'm just going to put this there as though it's like an eye of Sauron or something. All right, back to more measurements. So the face, being this size, can be divided up into 3 sections. You got your top section, your middle section, and your chin section. And you'll see that sitting right at the top of the eyebrow, bottom of the nose, bottom of the chin, the face kind of fits perfectly. And imagine if you had like a hairline, this is where it would typically go, right? So it would divide perfectly into 3. Well, yeah, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then now we're going to talk about other measurements. So the eye inner corner, typically either aligns pretty close to the edge of the nose, but it never really touches the edge of the mouth. And the edge of the nose for a generic face is typically smaller than the width of the mouth. The height of the mouth usually hits the jaw. The ends of your ears typically line up with the tip of your nose, bottom of your nose. Tops of your ears usually line up with the tops of your eyes. The eyes are always going to be smack center of the face. As you can see the distance, right? The eyes are smack center of the size of your head. So whenever you're drawing and you make your center line, just know this is where the eyes are going to go. Hello. And then everything else will be measured based on the placement of your eyes, right? So get that out of here. Edges of your eyes sort of line up with the edge of the jaw. And usually for females, the neck is slightly smaller than the width of the jaw, whereas males, they might be a little thicker because they have more neck muscles and everything. And so those are the basic measurements for drawing a face. Now, let's try to put some of these skills into practice by actually drawing a face, right? So let me just hide, delete these, delete. Oh, no, I'm going to keep that eye. I think it's very funny. All right, shrink this baby. Put it aside. All right. So let us try drawing one ourselves. We're going to start out with good old oval. This is going to be front-facing face. Sort of more tapered towards the end like an egg. But face shapes always vary. I'm just teaching you to draw the most generic shape right now. So this is your head, right? And you're going to find the middle line. Those are where your eye's going to go. That's where your hairline is going to go. And right smack center. And we're going to draw the neck. Again, the neck is going to be slightly thinner than your jawline. All right, so we got those measurements, right? And from there, we're going to start drawing the eyes. So an eye, we're going to draw a very basic almond shape. So it's going to look sort of like a teardrop, sort of like an almond. Like a half crescent. Draw on our pupils. They're going to be slightly closed like this. Draw in the under eyelid. Repeat again. Make sure you're thinking about the distance between them. Again, we're going to draw ourselves some irises. Draw the under eye. You can include some eyelids if you wish. Draw ourselves some eyebrows. And eyebrows usually sit about half an eye distance away from the eye, though that may vary depending on how much eyelid space a person has. So I'm giving them a very strong Nike eyebrows right here. Right. We're going to draw in the ears. And the nose is going to sit somewhat close to the ends of those ears. So let's draw in some nostrils. And these nostrils indicate that this nose is very generic, super basic kind of nose. The mouth is going to sit slightly lower. Usually when you draw a mouth, you kind of want to think about it as a mountain rather than a straight line, because you have the Cupid's bow, you have the little divot. The lips also vary, but that's typically how you would approach drawing a mouth in the first place, right? Not everyone's going to have the Cupid's bow, but on average, people usually have it. And again, we're going to make sure the mouths are far enough. The ends of the eyes are meeting the jaws. Inner corner of the eyes, about the distance of the nose, right? And you can just expand the size of that head just a tad bit because you need enough space to house all that big brain of yours. And then we can just erase away some of these guidelines. And there you have this super generic face, right? Is a human face. It looks somewhat recognizable. There we go. All right, so now that you've got the basics of how a face, you can measure it, I will actually show you how to implement like some of those skills into real practice, right? You're gonna look at reference photos, you're gonna learn how to measure actual face distance and stuff, because once you've built up the repertoire, built up the intuition for how real faces look and how they're shaded, it becomes a lot easier for you to start simplifying or stretching it towards your own particular style, right? So I'll show you how to do it straight matter of the fact, and then after I will show you how I typically stylize it. First, let's bust out a line art so you get a good foundation. So let's start with the head. Her face is a lot more square. The middle lines, really helpful for guiding where you want to go. And you can see her jaw is basically where her neck begins. And so we're gonna pop down that neck. Her neck is pretty short. Right. And then we're just gonna put down her ears. General size of an ear is about this big. We don't want it too big or too small. And it usually rests somewhere around this middle region, right? And then we're gonna draw in her hairline so we have a good guideline for where her face starts. Side of her head. We're gonna draw in her hair. Her bun we're just gonna represent as a big old lump for now. Let's not worry too much because when we paint, we're gonna be able to paint in those shapes, right? So her hairline is right here. Her bangs are gonna be here. So middle of the face, we're gonna establish where her nose is. This is where her ears are. Oh, let me use a color that's better seen. This is where her ears are, where her ears end, right? And her nose ends slightly below that. So we're gonna make sure it follows that. So her ears are gonna be slightly above. Her nose is gonna start here. So we can put down the nostrils already. Her mouth is sitting right near where her jaw angles, and so establish her bottom of her lip. Her bottom of her lip's pretty close to the chin, but not quite there yet, right? And we can see the tops of her ears are actually higher than the top of her eye. So we're gonna have to capture that. So it also seems like her ears are sort of lopsided. Perhaps it's the angle, or maybe that's her. I mean, every body is different, right? And that's why it's really important to really hone in your observation skills and be able to use various features to measure reference points. And that'll help you a lot with like likeness and everything. Okay, her ears there. So her eyebrows are sitting pretty high up then in that case. Her shoulders are definitely sloped. You can see based on the way she tilts her shoulders, kind of like that. So we're gonna have to capture that. And don't worry if it's not perfect right now, because when we paint, everything will be fixed. But we do want to give ourselves a good foundation, so when we do paint, we're not going to struggle as much. Right, her eyebrows have to be the same height or else it's going to look real wonky. Alright, so midline, her eyes are going to sit right here. And her eyelids, eyes sitting somewhere right here, and then we can measure the distance from her inner corner to her nose is pretty close. It's pretty close. So we gotta make sure it's similarly placed. And she's got these huge pretty eyes, but don't make them too huge because this is a realistic version and we don't want to look too crazy, right? Best way to check if your proportions are right, zoom out. Zoom all the way out. And you can see generally whether or not you got it. Alright, so we got a good foundation and now we can start actually painting and putting in our values. So let's do a nice, sort of lighter, on the lighter side, medium kind of color as our base value. Gotta make sure we get in the hair. I'm not quite doing black, just because I want to reserve, like, maybe I want to make some areas super, super dark. Alright, we're gonna establish our core shadows. So this half of her face is slightly darker than this half. And even though the contrast is pretty low, you still have to keep that when you're doing it. So we're gonna establish that right now before we forget it, okay? Don't worry that it's kind of messy right now. We can always fix things with painting. But we do want to make sure that we got every single value correct. And the best way I find to identify whether your values are correct is squint at your picture, and that helps you limit the amount of information you're actually processing, and you can focus more on the values. And so you can see whether or not your values are working on the large scale. And so you see here that her eye socket and her eyebrow meet at quite sort of an angle. Her nose, there we go. And if you squint, you'll notice that her bottom of her neck is slightly darker than the rest of her body. So we're gonna get that in there. And then come back in to bring back some light for the collarbones. Alright, now we gotta get some core shadows around her eyes. So we're gonna color pick this and we're gonna go darker in value. And since the eye socket wraps underneath the eyes, we're gonna get slight shadow underneath. And her particular facial feature, her eyebrows will dip sort of kind of like that. Right? So we're going to bring out our soft opacity brush, do a quick transition to capture that kind of indentation for her brow and her nose. Alright, and then I'm going to keep everything relatively still far away. We're going to establish her lip. But before we do the bottom lip, I gotta come in with the chin, because you can see when you light the face, the mouth sticks out, right? So that means it creates a slight shadow underneath the lip, following the rest of the face. Alright, so you gotta get rid of that. And so you're gonna have a slight cast shadow right here. Let me lock this layer. We're going to go a little deeper into those shadows. I'm also just going to add a little texture brush to play it up a little bit so it doesn't look so boring. Alright, back to our regular brush, our number 40. Slightly darker to capture that collarbone right here. We're still very rough in the stages, and so now we're going to actually try to sculpt out her nose. Her nose has this beautiful cast shadow right around here. So we're going to try to capture that using a soft brush. And then we're going to clean it up. At this stage, you also want to put in some of those cast shadow that's under her nose also. This part right here is going to be ever so lighter because it's facing the light. And you want to be careful when you're doing edges, because if you do it too crazy dark or too crazy contrast, you're going to end up looking too crazy of a contrast. You're going to end up looking like this. And that's reserved for harsh lighting, not for soft lighting like this. So we're going to follow that same kind of lightness back into her face, where her eye socket just about gets that light. And maybe the side of her face also gets a little bit of that light, because I think the light is coming from our left, right? We're also going to shape out her nose. Look carefully, it seems that the shadow is coming from this way. So be careful. And at this stage, I like to try to do the eyes before I then go in and merge the two layers and start actually painting, right? So let's get the eyelids. And so this part's gonna be dark. Her eye socket right here is gonna curve out to represent it's a round shape. Another core shadow, and you can make this help define her face by keeping some of those edges, right? See, like that sort of edge. And then there's that bounce light we remember. So we gotta bring in a little bit of that light. We gotta darken up this area because we gotta prepare it for that deep fold that occurs right here. So we're gonna slowly transition into a slightly darker color, right? Once we get into the fold. And then that's how we create radial shading. Same thing goes for this side. Follow her eyelids. And because this part touches so close to her eyebrow, it's going to get a slightly darker value, right? Even this part's going to be slightly darker because it's in recess of her eye socket. And it's only right here that it starts brightening up. So we just bring that back. Just like that, okay. And that's a good base before you merge them all and start actually painting. So I'm gonna merge this down. And now we can actually start painting and you can start messing around with things properly. Because when you have lines, you're going to be restricted to just those lines. And so once you merge it, you're going to feel a lot more free to paint based on silhouette and big shapes rather than painting based on lines, right? Okay, so this part. You're going to notice that her shoulder pops out like this. While her shoulder's not the main focus, we still gotta make it look relatively cohesive, right? Can't just neglect it just because we don't care about the shoulders. No, no, no. All right. Come back in here, carve out that general shape that her chin had. We're going to use our lasso tool to get sort of a cleaner edge and get rid of some of that line that we had before previously. Now I'm just going to add to my lasso by pressing shift, and you'll see that my lasso has a plus sign now. So I'm going to expand the lasso so I can create a better transition between the values. Because this is soft lighting, so there shouldn't be too harsh of an edge. Remember to pay attention to your values by squinting ever so often. Try to zoom out a little bit so you're looking at the big picture rather than the small picture. And now you see I've gotten all the values pretty smooth, but we've lost a lot of the interest, so we gotta bring back some of those edges, right? Bringing back some of those edges. Good balance of edge and softness will help create a very interesting portrait to look at. And I now notice while I zoomed out that her shoulder is way far away now. So I'm gonna zoom out some more and look at this big picture, right? Because I didn't like the value I chose for it, I locked the layer. I'm gonna lighten it up, make it a lot smoother. And then I'm gonna come in with a slightly lighter layer, just oh so slightly, to carve out that kind of collarbone, you know? Same idea here. Smooth out that shoulder. Make sure the collarbone actually makes sense and we're not just stuffing a whole bunch of values. All right, that neck's looking a lot better. Now we gotta fix that chin because we messed up. We gotta create our edge again. Jump back in. And I'm gonna unlock the layer now and then actually start painting over those lines. This ear is gonna be in shadow just because it's behind the face. And if you remember when I decided we would have a donut hair instead of actual hair, well, this is why, so we can actually carve out things. And now that I'm painting, I realized my right eyebrow was a little tad too low. And so this is where you get the opportunity to fix it. And just cover it up, right? Sort of like doing makeup. If you ever done makeup, then you know how to carve out features. It's basically the same idea: highlights, shadow, contour. And the front of the eyebrow, it's important not to make them too dark or else it'll look really fake and everything. Now you can see on her nose, she has this distinct shadow right here. And there's some slight bounce light that comes back here, so we're going to bring that in. And since this part of the nose is sort of lit, we gotta give it some attention, give it some of that light. I'm gonna fix up, cover that up, continue covering up things because we were silly and didn't erase before we merged. So if anything, be smart to erase. Now I'm actually just painting based on shapes, right? You see, I see a shape of the shadow, so I'm painting based on that rather than painting the actual feature itself. And that will help you dissociate the face from like trying to focus on likeness, because if you paint by shape, and you have the right correct measurements, eventually it's going to start looking like the person. Now her eye whites are a lot lighter than the rest of her face. And she has downturned eyes, so we gotta capture that. This eye is in shadow, so we gotta make sure we also capture that information. And this is why I said it doesn't really matter too much whether or not your line looks perfect, because we basically end up painting over everything anyway. And so her eyebrows aren't quite as far out on her side of her face, so we're gonna show that. She sort of has like a very thin nose bridge, so we're gonna try to capture that by creating some shadow here. We're also gonna soften that up. And we're gonna actually get in her nostrils, which are sort of at a slant if you see them correctly. So I'm gonna erase that so we can get them better. Trying to capture that core shadow back because I lost it while trying to erase those lines. her nostrils are at an angle, as you can see. So we gotta capture that. And so what I'm looking at right now is how am I gonna capture the shape of her nose bridge, right? And the way I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna come in with a highlight, but not too bright. We're not using white, because if we use white, we're gonna end up looking way too bright, right? Look really fake. We wanna use a color, value that's looks like white, basically, when we put it on. And because her nostrils are at a tilt, you're not going to see that much of the nostrils. And because I notice now that her face is a little longer than I want, I'm going to come in, do a bit of liquify. We want this tool. We're going to bring down her whole face. Hold a sec, let me get the picture up on my screen so I can actually see. And then now we're going to actually go back and liquify. So, liquify. Alright, so her face is slightly too high, so I'm just going to bring everything down a tiny bit. Just a tiny bit, not too crazy. So, we fixed it slightly. See, her proportions are slightly different. Her eyebrows are slightly rounder than that. Her right eyebrow is also more lifted up than my previous did. And this is the process of painting a portrait. You look at your reference photo and you try to compare, right? Playing Where's Waldo, right? Her eyebrows are pretty close together. Now I just regret that because I realized it wasn't the right value. It's fine, you know? That's what practice is for. You're learning. And we'll just also add in the nose ring since it'll help make her look more recognizable. So we start out with, for metal jewelry, we always start out with the darker value first. And then we bring in the lighter value. Now we gotta recapture that eyelid that we lost because we were covering up the lines. Sort of there. It's okay. I'm just doing this for... Now we're gonna carve out the lips, right? So the center where her lips are parted are gonna be in dark shadow, basically almost black from far away, so we can keep that. But the rest of her lip are not gonna be black. So right now I'm just carving out her opened mouth gape. She has a slight upturn on the corner of her lip. And we're going to capture that. And so the top of that lip has some shadow, so I'm just capturing that. And because this side of the lip is in the core shadow area, it's going to receive a darker value, especially there. I'm just gonna come in with the real quick ear shadows so we get it out of the way. Right, so it seems that I lost a little bit of that edge that was on her nose, and so I'm just gonna come back oh so slightly, give it back to her. Especially where her nose ring comes in. Now I'm gonna come in with a slightly dark black, well, not quite black, for the eyelashes. We're gonna map it out so we can quickly get these eyes in, and she's gonna stop looking like a demon. She's got downturned eyes, so I gotta remember to keep those downturned eyes. Gotta be careful not to do it too much, or else you're gonna start looking like duck lips. Her lip shape is similar to the duck lip. I would not go too overboard, or else you're gonna mess up the whole thing. And you're gonna have a pain in the ass trying to fix it. Alright, time to put in those pupils. Get you those perfect circles. We're gonna increase the size. Erase away. All right, so we got those pupils in, and obviously her eyes aren't black, and so we will deal with that in a bit after we've now got her pupils in, irises in. We now have a better reference of how round-eyed her eyes actually need to be, right? Want to capture her eyelashes using a soft brush. I'm fixing the nose again because I realized that the shape wasn't right. And so you can see, even I have issues trying to get likeness right, and it just takes a little bit of more practice and time before you're able to get likeness down. And especially in black and white, it really forces you to focus on the values rather than like the fancy stuff. Okay, let's put in some of the highlights in her hair before I freak out. So this side of her hair is gonna catch a lot more of those highlights than the other side, right? Especially these two strands right here. Gonna add some texture to the hair. Nothing too crazy in value jumps, just because this is a very soft kind of value transitions. Alright, and now we're gonna go back to the eyes. We're gonna try to get her really big eyelids again, because we definitely lost it while we were working. So I'm just gonna zoom in, give myself a little bit more scene room so I can do a relatively clean line, sort of where her darkest recesses are, sort of like that. She has relatively round eyelids, as you can see, right? And so for her inner corners, there are some shadows, but we're not using black. We're just using a dark gray to capture that. And we're going to do her muscles of her eye. Those were slightly too big for my liking, so I'm gonna go back, try to fix it. There, yeah. A lot better. Basically, the irises aren't as big as we thought they are, right? I basically love using my number 40 brush. It works so well for everything. We're gonna get that muscle in there. We're gonna bring back some of that light on the eyelid because it is not that recessed, it's not that hooded. So gotta make sure it's there. Such low contrast. Basically, her nose gets lost, which is why I'm struggling so much to try to convey it. And the mouth is not finished, obviously. Let's try to finish the mouth at least then. If you've seen any of my time-lapse videos, you always know that I have trouble trying to simplify the mouth, trying to make it look good, while also look 3D, right? And at this point, I'm just willing to restart the whole mouth so I can get the form right this time. Okay, let's see. And since I don't believe she is wearing too much makeup, her lips usually will probably blend very well into her skin. So that's why I'm doing this kind of like mixing of her lips into the skin. Okay, move this over. I'm gonna try to liquefy once more because I feel like her neck is now way too long. All right. Okay, much better. Yep, at this point, I'm just gonna redo the lips because if gosh darn looking weird, like you're trying to patch up a soggy noodle and you just can't make it crispy again, right? The more you add water to it, it's just not gonna work. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna cover it up. We're gonna start over. And that is okay. I mean, starting over just means you're giving yourself a new try, new attempt, right? Doing a different approach. And so this time I am not merging the lip line. And we're gonna stay relatively far away from the detail so we can see this objectively. Corner of her mouth reaches further than the inner corner of her lip. All right, time to lower the opacity. Oh yeah, I jump around when I work, but obviously you don't have to do this. This is just a way for me to work out things that I immediately see before I forget about them. All right, time to start the lips once more. This time we're going to use better use of our soft brush to capture that form. So looking slightly better. Just redo that Cupid's bow. Alright, at this point when I feel like I can't capture the likeness, gotta dissociate myself. There we go. Now I can notice all the problems that has been bothering me, right? And that's what's so great about Photoshop. You can flip your canvas and see everything that's wrong. Unlike in real life, can't do that unless you magically somehow got a Flipperoonie machine, in which case, please give it to me. I would like to have it. Thank you very much. I'll sell my soul to it. Alright, we're gonna get rid of that lip line layer. Work on creating that 3D form. And I realize her nose is crooked, so time to fix it. Liquify tool is my god. I love it so much. Without it, my works would not be half as good. Spicy. There, that's a lot better. Okay, let's do the eyes before I forget about them. So let's move our image over a little bit so I can see. And so her eyes, I'm gonna lock the layer. Oops, too bright. Basically, she has this ring, so I'm gonna use a heavier brush like this. And the tops are gonna be darker because they are in shadow. We're gonna get in that lightness. And then we're gonna put in our pupils. I typically like to modify the shape of the eye just a tad bit so it doesn't look so perfect. So we're gonna mess with it a little bit. But we're gonna make sure that we keep the core darkness and the core lightness, right? This eye is actually in light, so we actually gotta lighten it up. So I'm gonna use this type of brush to create sort of a fuzzy iris because it seems that based on the photo, the filters that was applied to it, her irises look fuzzy and almost like blown out. All right, bring back our lightness using our square brush. Gotta be careful not to mess up that kind of darkness versus lightness kind of balance. All right, and then we're gonna add our specular highlight, which isn't white, but instead sort of a close white. It's like just a lighter color than that iris. I'm gonna merge it down. And fix whatever I feel like I want to adjust. So the eyeballs here, they have to get some of that core shadow treatment too. So right now, I am now treating the eyeball as a sphere and giving it that core shadow. Okay. You might be wondering why I'm erasing the eyelashes. It's because eyelashes don't look that good when they're like individually done like that. So you gotta treat them special, you know? You gotta squint your eyes a little bit when you're looking at your eyelashes. And you gotta do them a little bit more messily. Gotta bust out the good old trusty pressure point round brush, right? To create those tiny eyelashes that we love to see. And we gotta smudge them out so they don't look so distinct. And they're actually part of the lashes. Something like that. I mean, they're not exact, but it's fine. And then we'll come back in with the final highlights with some of those textures that we want. Exaggerate just a little bit, but not too much or else you're gonna go crazy. Alright, and then we'll finish off with doing her jewelry, which may seem difficult, but again, like I mentioned, jewelry always do dark value first and then come in with the lights. And we notice now that her right, our left, slightly high. So I'm just gonna fix that, correct that real easy. Oh, but I changed the shape, so let's try this again. So it lines up with her other eye, right? We're gonna mess up her hair a little bit, add some strands. And then change our brush to be super small to get that super deep crevice. Finish off with this earring, this one. Add a bit of that lighter values. Do her necklace. And you see what I mean about the eyelashes, being careful about them. From far away, you don't really see them. So honestly, what's the point of drawing those individual lashes unless you're gonna do close-ups, right? So I'm just gonna fix it right now so it looks more accurate to the photo. All right, this is the final version of the super realistic. Now, what we gotta do is flip it upside down to double check whether or not we got the proportions right. So once we flip it upside down, immediately I already noticed some issues, right? So what you gotta do is image rotation 180. And now we're gonna do some liquify, last minute liquefies to fix everything. Because we got the values and everything. All right, I think that should fix it. There, see? Magic, like magic, right? Basically liquefy and flipping your canvases back and forth, making sure that you're disassociating the face. You want to make sure it doesn't look like a face at this point. And so now we're going to try to stylize it. And when you stylize it, you have free reign. So you do not have to be so concerned about getting the proportions absolutely correct. Because stylizing, the point is to retain the main features, but to simplify in a way that still makes sense, right? So here's how I would typically do this phase. Stylized portraits for me usually take a lot less time than, say, if I were to do a realistic one, because I wanted to get super accurate proportions, right? So typically a realistic portrait for me takes about 2 hours, whereas a stylized portrait might take me only about an hour, right? So let's do it. I want to capture her kind of tilted look, right? So I'm gonna focus on doing that. So her face is obviously square, so I'm gonna retain that. And I'm just going faster now because this is stylized, and so it's much less about getting super accurate proportions, rather more about getting the feel of it. And so I'm doing this very quick, very loose kind of feel. Again, her bun is gonna be a donut because it doesn't matter. We're gonna paint it away anyway. Downturned eyes. And I like to make my eyes bigger because it's my influence from my manga anime days. So let's see. Again, her ears are higher than her nose, so you gotta maintain that. And you can see how I exaggerate the size of the irises because I just love how pretty you can make the irises. All right, we got ourselves the roughest sketch of all. Now we gotta start shading in. Give ourselves a nice base layer. And because this is stylization, that means you can take some liberties about how you shade. So I'm still gonna pay attention to my core values. This whole side of her face is in shadow. Her bangs are in shadow. That part's slightly in shadow. But we're also gonna showcase off how simplified you can make things. There's an owl out there. Woo woo. It must be rooting for us to finish up this piece as efficiently as possible. And that is totally possible because stylized means that you do not have to stay super true to reality. You can fudge it a little bit so it still looks realistic, but it might not convey all the same information, right? And you can even rely a little bit more on line. Oops. Again, pay attention to whether you lock your layers or else you're going to end up with that kind of mess. And you can be even more expressive. I like to be super brushworky when it comes to stylized portraits. And so you're going to see me take some liberties with how I do blending of the core shadows. All right, we're gonna also put in the hair before I forget about it. All right, this time we're gonna do some erasing of the lines so we don't end up with a huge ass mess when we're trying to merge these layers. All right, let's get in those irises first. Or not irises, those corneas. I know I'm not a science major, but I am disappointed that I don't remember after watching hours of House MD. Like, you'd think I'd pick up something, right? All right, now I'm gonna merge it. And here's where we start painting and fixing up some of our values. slight bounce light. We're going to use this kind of textured brush to get that bounce light in there. You can see how I kind of a lot of the details that I used to pay attention to before. And that's because with stylization, you can totally just wing it and then call it sort of. As long as it's sort of similar, it still counts. But even with stylization, you always got to remember core values are the most important. Because without core values, your work's going to fall through. It's not going to look good, no matter how accurate you are when you are stylizing. If the values and the shapes aren't good, it's not going to look complete. And when I do stylize, I like to leave a lot of my edges rather than blend it out, which is why you see me mostly using the hard edge brush rather than like switching back to my soft brush. Now the one few times that I do switch back is because I want to get that rounded shape of her nose. And so to do that, you gotta use a soft brush. Alright, now to get some of that likeness back, I gotta do a little bit of comparison, you know? Okay. Look from far away. Her eyes are a tad low. Her face. I'll fix the ear later. But you can see I try to make her eyes more downturned and try to fix up some of that exaggeration. That should help a little bit. I will now fix her ear. Right here, there's a tiny bit of brilliance. And we're going to try to capture that lip using soft brush. And we're going to reduce the size of our brush, try to get that bit of darkness at the corner. Same goes for this side. Then we're going to come in with that highlight that sparkles up. That probably comes from the girl wearing highlighter. I'm going to add a tad of darkness right here after I fix that nose up. Just to the very edge so it distinguishes the nose a little bit. And we're going to get that eyelid crease. this over. Now we're nearing the final touches. And it's only been about 30 minutes since we started, right? That's how much faster stylization goes because you're not concerned so much about the details. And it probably helped that I've already done this portrait once, so now I've gotten a hang of it and I know what works and what doesn't, right? I'm going to remove that area by lassoing by pressing Alt, and that will allow you to lasso subtract. Now I'm just trying to cover some of those lines that I did not cover up. Gotta fix those eyebrows. Her bangs come close to basically her eyebrows in the front. And then we're gonna again add in the bright section. All right, time to flip our canvas and see how we're doing. All right, not bad, but I definitely see room for improvement. When that pops up, it just means because you lock the layer, it will only transform within the painting. So if you move things outside, it's gonna do some whack shit. So just turn that off, and now we're gonna liquefy. And we're gonna fix some of those proportions. All right, and then looks a lot more balanced, right? All right, let's just do the jewelry and then we shall be done real quickly spit. Remember, dark values first. Not that dark. Gotta be dark in comparison to your surroundings. I'm adding some texture, so it looks like there's something going on there. And again, we just do a really rough necklace. And I believe she has freckles, so I'm gonna bust out one of my freckles and give it to her. So I believe this is, I think I'll like to try number 187, and if I don't like it, I'll change it. I feel like you can't see it that much, so let's try 271. Sort of see it. And then you're just gonna come back in later with your square brush number 40 and add in some of those individual, like, bigger freckles, right? Well, if you wanted to save it, this is where you'd save it. Don't be like me and don't have bad habit of not saving things. But regardless, this is basically how I do stylized portraits. I'll be honing in on some of those specific features so you understand why and how I did some of these things. Hopefully this gives you a general idea of how to approach doing portraits. For the class exercise, I would suggest maybe don't do her hair if you're struggling to do hair right now. But if you're confident that you can do some hair, then go for it. I'm excited to see what results you will produce. And let's just end this by putting these side to side so you can compare the two different versions, right? The left version versus the right version. Well, which one's your favorite? Which do you like to do? More realistic, more stylized? And it's up to you when you do the class exercise. So I'll see you in the next video where I will drill into you the very specific skills you will need in order to be able to put all these parts together to create a portrait just like this. All right, bye.